Boker
Good
Tov.
morning, everyone. Boker Tov, Boker Or. We are going to pick up from where we left off last week. Hold on a second here. I'm trying to figure this out. Give me a second. Why is it not? Here we go. Okay. All right. So last week we finished up in the early 7th century, the early 600s. We talked about the Byzantines and the Persians battling, and of course the Jews coming out in the negative, as oftentimes they do. Right around the same time in the early 7th century, a new religion obviously develops in Arabia. And Islam is influenced by both Judaism and Christianity, and it profoundly alters life on the Arabian Peninsula for years to come. It is the second religion to emerge and to emanate from Judaism, but there's a number of distinctions. The first is its founder is not a Jew. All right, again, in Christianity, Jesus is a Jew, acting as a Jew in Jewish society. The founder of Islam is not, and it was not it didn't start out as a Jewish sect. All right, and so in a sense, there are ways in which, in its initial stages, as a result, Islam is less bitter towards Judaism than Christianity at its early stages. All right, it's not a Jewish sect. Its founders are not Jewish, and there's never a claim. And again, the distinction for Christianity that makes it much more difficult, in particular, is there's no claim of Jews killing, of engaging in deicide, right? Which makes it a much more complicated relationship for centuries and years to come. You don't have that charge, which is unique in religious history. Nonetheless, having said all of that, like Christianity, Islam's anti-Judaism is deeply rooted. It comes from its earliest years, and that's what we're going to explore today. Islam is born from the womb of Judaism. It too is rejected by Jews whose very validation it is seeking, and therefore it has an identity crisis, particularly vis-a-vis Jews. Okay, it's not a matter of all other religions at its early stage, it's particularly the Jews. So let's take a look at that and why that might be. All right, so Islam begins with the teachings of Muhammad. Muhammad is born around 570 of the Common Era, late 6th century, and he makes his home in Mecca in southwest Arabia. All right, starts out in Mecca. When Muhammad is in his 40s, he begins to travel into the desert to meditate. And you see this constantly as a theme in virtually all the religions. Paul goes out to the desert, and from Paul's writings and Paul's experience emanates Christianity. Where do the Jews go? They go out into the desert. Moses alone goes up onto the mountain, into the desert, and there's this sense of private revelation. You have the same thing with the Mormons. Joseph Smith goes out into the desert and has this private revelation. Almost all religions start that way, in a sense, out of the larger society. All right. While in the desert, Muhammad has a revelation. It not only changed his life, but the lives of people worldwide over the next 1,300 years. And let me share with you the premises that underlie or the messages that come out of that revelation. Let's start with that. Number one, Allah is the one, the only and almighty God, full of compassion and kindness. There is no God other than Allah. God is the only God. All right. And it is the ultimate example of monotheism. It is so attuned to the uncompromising nature of Judaism's monotheism that though Muhammad had been influenced by Christian teachers, he nonetheless rejects Christianity's Trinity and the divinity of Jesus as non-monolithic. All right, that you can't have multiple parts of a God and so that therefore he rejects the Trinity. And reading one in the text, and it's a short one, I'm going to read it myself here for you, states that this is all right. Unbelievers are those that say Allah is one of three. Anybody have a question to whom he's referring? Okay, there is but one God. If they do not desist from saying so, those of them that disbelieve shall be strongly punished. He's clear in his rejection of the concept of a Trinity. So his first statement that comes out of this revelation is monotheism in its purest form. Secondly, the second idea that emerges is his adoption of Abraham as the father of Islam. Okay, so one is God, two is Abraham becomes the father of Islam, and in Surah within the Quran, Muhammad writes how Abraham and his son Ishmael convert the Kaaba, the holy rock of paganism, where pagans had come to worship, they convert it into the holy shrine of Islam. Okay, so Abraham, and he's embracing Ishmael instead of Isaac, and we know that that's been a source of contention for years. 3, Jewish law also deeply influences Muhammad. And there are a number of ways in which this is evident. Let me give you a few. First, in its early stages, Muhammad asked his followers to pray in the direction of Jerusalem. Okay? And they also observed Yom Kippur as a day of fasting and penance and repentance. It's only later, at a later point, after Muhammad tries to get the Jews, to become followers, and they refuse, they would not embrace him. At that point, he substitutes Mecca for Jerusalem, and he substitutes Ramadan for Yom Kippur. But in its early form, Yom Kippur and Jerusalem are far more a focus than they are today, obviously. Obviously, the dietary laws, you know that there are many, many similarities. If you go into a Muslim restaurant, you could probably find your way to kashrut some way. All right. The laws of kashrut, there are parallels within Muslims. You are forbidden carrying blood. Again, blood is life, the lifeblood according to the Torah. Forbidden blood and the flesh of swine, and also any flesh of animals sacrificed to idols. All right. What next is you have the daily prayers. They have the 5 daily prayers instead of 3. You see the patterns developing that he's building on Jewish practice. All right. That's the third piece. The fourth in this revelation is that Muhammad is the prophet. He's been called to spread God's message, and he is a prophet sent by God. This is the concept within Hebrew as well of an angel delivering a message. They see him as the last in a long line of prophets that include Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. All right, the last message here, the last and the fifth of the revelatory concepts, is that the day of judgment is coming, and when it arrives, those who do not serve God faithfully would be engulfed in flames. So every religion devises in some way a starting moment as well as an end times moment, something to which there is a drive. And so you see that within Muhammad's writings as well. Any questions on at least the initial 5? The big 5, as we will call it for today. Okay. He's living at this point in Mecca, and he's asking people in its early stages to turn to Jerusalem to pray, to make their pilgrimages to Jerusalem. And so he ends up very badly mocked by not the Jews, but by the population of Mecca. And this, at the end of the day, is an economic issue. The people in Mecca, they are accustomed to people coming and making pilgrimages to Mecca, to the pagan idols there. And while they're there, what do? Well, all of us do when we go to Israel, we shop. Israel does well with all sorts of tourism, because as we go there, we spend our money. We spend our money on hotels. We spend our money. I must buy 25 kippot every time I show up. We spend our money in the restaurants. We spend our money in tourism dollars. Here you have a pagan society in which a new prophet arises who is saying to them, no. Everybody go to Jerusalem. And there's an economic revolt. This is bad for the local economy. And so the result is Muhammad decides he almost has no choice. He leaves Mecca because so many people are opposed to his teaching, and he goes to Medina. And it is the Muslim calendar that begins in 622, which is the year he leaves Mecca for Medina. Okay? So you have a sense of the economics at play here too. So he arrives in Medina, and what does he encounter? He encounters a city that is very, very Jewish. Almost 50% of the population is Jewish. The rest of the population is dominated by two large confederation of tribes that worship many gods. And I'll give you the names of the confederation, so you should have them. The first is the Aws, AWS. And the second is the Khazraj, KHAZRAG. So you have these two big paganism. There's many of them, but there's two that are dominating. All right, these two groups that are at war with each other over political control. Both groups had settled in Medina sometime during the 5th century, 200 years before this, and they had long battled for control of the city. Jewish tribes that are living there take sides in this battle between the Aws and the Khazraj. And in June of 622, when Muhammad arrives, representatives of these two tribes obviously know of this prophet because they meet with him twice, and they ask for his help in making peace in Medina. They have two meetings. At the second meeting, 75 tribal leaders from the two confederations swear their allegiance to him and accept Islam as their faith. And that is the beginning of Islam as a real faith structure. Okay? He now has people to follow him. And so to strengthen that position, Muhammad creates a document that defines the relationship among the people of these various groups. And that document today is often referred to as the Constitution of Medina. Okay, so what we're going to do is reading number 2 is relatively short. We're going to go around, play Hollywood squares. Gail, you have the first position in the square. So I'm going to ask you to read reading number 2.
In the name of Allah, the merciful, the beneficent. This is a document from Muhammad the Prophet between the believers and Muslims of Quraysh, Muhammad's tribe, and Yathrib, Medina, and whoever follows them and are attached to them and tribes with them. They are a single community in the face of all men. A believer shall not kill a believer for the sake of an unbeliever, nor shall he aid an unbeliever against a believer. Allah's protection is one. He grants protection even to the least among them. The believers are responsible for one another in the face of all other men.
Okay, so what he's doing here is creating community. All right? He's creating who belongs, who doesn't belong, and what are the basic ground rules for that belonging. All right? He treats all believers as brothers with duties and responsibilities to one another. In the past, they had been these local tribes with the families and clans and tribes, and now they have a more inclusive loyalty, and they're not allowed to fight amongst themselves. Okay, that's step one. The document continues, reading 3. Joyce, do you have it? You're in square number 2.
Unmute.
She's trying. There you go.
Okay. The peace of the believers is one. No believer shall conclude a separate peace from another believer fighting in the path of Allah. Rather, it shall be for all equally. The believers should avenge each other's blood when it is spilled in the path of Allah.
Okay, so we have rights and responsibilities. Have no separate treaties with other groups. We're going to do this in the collective. Those who worship many gods are now the outsiders. Okay, that's what we're continuing on by creating borders. All right, what about the Jews? Let's see what he has to say about the Jews. Sandy, you've got square number 3. Sandy, you're muted.
Any Jew who follows us shall have aid and comfort. Such a Jew shall not be oppressed, nor his enemies aided against him. The Jews of the tribes in Medina are a community with the believers. The Jews have their religion and the Muslims have theirs. This applies to their clients and themselves, except those who act wrongfully and sin, for they bring destruction upon themselves and their households.
Okay, and it continues. Lori, would you read us number 5?
If the Jews are called to make peace and maintain it, they must do so. And if they call upon the believers for the like of this, it is within their rights, except where one is fighting for the sake of the faith.
Okay, so let's take some of this apart and make sense out of it. Believing himself to be the final and greatest prophet of Moses monotheism, and having adopted a lot of Jewish thought and practice, who does Muhammad want to buy in? The Jews. And he appeals to the Jews of Arabia to recognize his role and to adopt Islam as the culmination, as the fulfillment of Judaism. Now, if you remember, Christianity makes the same claim. There's a secessionism, that Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism. It's a starting point, Judaism, but it gets fulfilled through Christianity. And he's making that same claim here. He has a deep desire for Jewish recognition in the same way that Jesus had in his time. No group could validate Muhammad's religious claims, and therefore as much as Jews, and therefore nobody could threaten them in the same way either. Right? That's where we've gotten into trouble over time. Nonetheless, Jews opposed Muhammad's logic and in Muhammad in general for a series of reasons. And again, let me list them out for you. Number 1, Jews had declared that the days of prophecy were over with Ezra, that he was the final of the prophets and that there would be no further prophecy. After Ezra, there were so many people running around claiming prophecy that at a certain point you have to stop and say, we don't know what to believe anymore. It's like walking around the streets of a city, people standing on all the corners and yelling out their prophecy. At a certain point, it's like, okay, I don't know how to make sense of this. The rabbis determined the prophecy, the delivery of direct words from God, ends with Ezra. And so therefore, Muhammad cannot be a prophet any more than Jesus could have been a prophet in the Jewish lens. Okay, so that's 1. Number 2, as with the claims against Jesus, Jews held that Muhammad's message essentially was not a new message, and anything within it that was new is not true. Okay, not new And if there is something new, it's not true. It doesn't replace what God's original message was. Islam may have served as a religious advance for the pagans living in that society, but for Jews, it was simply another offshoot of Judaism. Okay, so that's the second. One, days of prophecy are over. Two, it's not new. There's nothing new being presented that has validity. Three, another reason to reject the words of Muhammad was that he did not have any real knowledge of the Bible, in large part because he had never read the Bible. And he had heard stories and he had heard references to the text, but they're often erroneous. So, for example, in Surah chapter 28, he has Pharaoh of about the 13th century before the Common Era asking Haman of about the 4th century of the Common Era to erect the Tower of Babel somewhere around 3,000 years before the Common Era. So it's essentially having Shakespeare speak to John Kennedy to engage in an event that happened, to work together to build the Wall of China. It doesn't make sense. It's anachronistically inaccurate. Okay, so that's the third piece, a lack of understanding and knowledge of the Jewish Bible. The fourth piece, it seems to be a lack of moral quality to some of Muhammad's teachings. So, for example, they see it as not only not equaling, but it is less than. So, some of examples in again the book Surah, chapter 33, Muhammad exempts himself from his own law that limits a man to 4 wives. Okay, now in today's society, the whole thing is bizarre. Okay, but the morality here, by the way, Judaism did not necessarily have a sense of one wife only, and really legally until I think it was Sajid Gaon in the 10th century. Nonetheless, it was something that was not practiced. Jews had one wife. It wasn't legalistically forbidden. But nonetheless, here, the founder is saying, I want 5. I want 6. I don't want to be limited by this. And then ultimately, the final break for the whole thing is that he, like Paul, rejects Jewish law. And for Jews, that is the line. There is no rejection of Jewish law and remaining as a Jew. That's simply not an option within a Jewish tradition. Okay, so you have 5 reasons why the Jews initially rejected him. There's also political considerations in the city of Medina. The Jews had been connected to these 2 groups in Medina. They had politically aligned themselves, and now Muhammad has brought them together, and they have renounced their separatism and their willingness to accept the Jews in full. And so you can see the Jews becoming uncertain about their own future here, and they're hoping the whole thing will just go away. That's their hope. Needless to say, that didn't happen. So as a result of this rejection, Muhammad never forgives the Jews. You see the same kind of thing with Paul. You see the same kind of thing with Martin Luther in the 16th century. We'll talk about that at a later point. And he never forgives them. And just as early Christian hostility to the Jews was therefore canonized into the New Testament, so Muhammad's angry reactions become recorded into the Quran. These writings throughout Muslim history seem to gain, as a result, a divine sanctioned antipathy towards Jews. His feelings get written down and become divinely ordained. In the Quran, and I'm not looking to create division here because understand things change over time, okay? In the Quran, Muhammad attacks the Jews and attempts to invalidate Judaism in several ways. First, and here again, I'm going to give you a list. First, and most significantly, he changes Abraham from a Jew to a Muslim. It's in the Quran, it says Abraham was neither a Jew nor a Christian. Christianity didn't even exist. He surrendered himself to Allah. Surely the men who are nearest to Abraham are those who follow him, this prophet, meaning Muhammad. Secondly, he condemns the Jews and delegitimizes their law in a thesis similar to that of Paul, that the many Torah laws from this point on are perceived as given to the Jews as a punishment for their sins. Kakatuv, as it says in their text, because of their iniquity, we forbade the Jews good things which were formerly allowed to them. So Islam has come about to identify all the sins of Judaism and to engage in punishment of the Jews. Third, Muhammad charges the Jews with falsifying their own Bible by deliberately omitting prophecies of Muhammad's coming. For example, in the Quran, chapter 2, Muhammad has Abraham mouth a prophecy of Muhammad's coming. Muhammad charges that the Jews extinguished the light of Allah by removing those kinds of prophecies from the Torah. Now, it's really hard to prove the negative, as we all know. All right? The fact that he makes the charge that these prophecies are removed, there's no defense. Fourth, Muhammad asserts, and this one is fascinating. I have never heard anything about this in Jewish tradition. Muhammad asserts that Jews, like Christians, are not true monotheists, a charge that he substantiates by claiming that the Jews believe that Ezra was the son of God. In the Quran, chapter 9, and the Jews say, Ezra is the son of Allah. Allah fights against them. How perverse are they? I have never heard that, but nonetheless, the charge is offered. Okay. So you've got a series there. These anti-Jewish fabrications. I mean, as a Jew, I can tell you that last one is not true. As much as I can possibly tell you, we haven't removed anything from the Bible. I don't believe Abraham was a Muslim. Okay. So the fabrications are reactions to the Jews' rejection of him. And ever since, they become written into the Quran, and therefore they become the word of God. That's the problem. All right. Initially, his words are aimed at the Jews of his time, but by getting included, by getting written into the founding documents, succeeding generations understand this as referring to Jews of all times, and it becomes the basis of Islamic anti-Semitism. Let me read you another verse, and then I want you to see how this verse is going to get used by Anwar Sadat years later. All right? This is, all right, chapter 2, verse 61. And humiliation and wretchedness. I want you to hear that phrase again. And humiliation and wretchedness were stamped upon them, and they were visited with wrath from Allah. This was because they disbelieved in Allah's revelations and slew the prophets accordingly. That was their disobedience and their transgressions. Again, humiliation and wretchedness was stamped upon them. This is used by a speech by Anwar Sadat in 1972 before his army officers. He cites this verse in saying, reading number 6. Where are we? Nomi, would you read number 6?
most splendid thing our Prophet Muhammad, God's peace and blessing on him, did was to evict the Jews from the entire Arabian Peninsula. I pledge to you that we will celebrate on the next anniversary, God willing, and in this place, with God's help, not only the liberation of our land, but also the defeat of Israeli conceit and arrogance, so that they must once again return to the condition decreed in our holy book. Humiliation and wretchedness were stamped upon them. We will not renounce this.
Right. What he's done is he's written a midrash. What do the rabbis do? They take a verse in the Bible and they base what Jews should be doing based on their interpretation of the Bible. All right. Lo tivashel gedi b'chalev imo. Don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. And so today we don't eat milk and meat together. They interpreted it. We live by it. All right. That's what's adopted here. Sandy, you unmuted. Does that mean you have something you want to add?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. I kind of watch that. I know I've learned that when I'm with the rabbi in a meeting, that when he unmutes, I need to stop. So I watch the signals. All right. Any comments or questions at this point? All right, we'll go on. One of the major significances of this treatment of minorities in Medina is important not only because it's anti-Jewish or anti-Christian, but what it does is establish who's in charge. Who's in charge of the community and under what conditions non-believers can live within that community. Muslims are in charge and they alone determine the status of the non-believer. Muhammad himself wanted to bring this to the larger world. Okay, remember he goes to Medina in 622, but he dies in 632. All right, 10 years later. It's all, and after a brief struggle for power, Muslims agree to make Abu Bakr the caliph or the successor to Muhammad. And as one of his first acts, the new caliph sends out a small army of Arabs to build an empire. They invade Palestine 2 years later in 634, and over the next 100 years, Muslims end up controlling an awful lot of the old Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, as well as parts of the Persian Empire. Their influence is enormous. And so, when you conquer peoples, you are confronted with what do you do with the multicultures, all right? That's the normal way of nation building. Israelis had a similar concept of what do you do, not just with the Arabs, but what do you do with with Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazic Jews and Mizrahi Jews and etc. How do you take people of various cultures and try to make one out of it? That's why I know in all my readings about early Israel, you hear about Israels in the plural. The reality of it is they still to this day haven't resolved that. All right. Well, the Muslims, but that's because they've been trying to do it peacefully. The Muslims weren't so generous about their way of doing it peacefully. All right. And so what their outcome is any pagans, anybody who worships other gods, many gods, can either convert or be put to death. Okay. That's their first premise. But they deal differently with Jews and Christians because there's similarities in certain ways between the three. Number one, in theory, they all worship one God. Two, they have the same prophets. If you remember, I described Abraham and Moses and Jesus, and etc. Share the same prophets. All believe in a similar life after death and judgment that comes with it, and similar ideas about the creation of the world. So there's enough similarities that they're going to treat Jews and Christians different from pagans. They will be considered not equals. And this is very important. You probably have heard the term dhimmi, D-H-I-M-M-I. They're people who are of a tolerated, not an equal, but a tolerated religion. They are dhimmis. Dhimmis have various rights and responsibilities that ultimately are spelled out in an agreement referred to the Pact of Umar. Now, remember, I told you by about 750, they had conquered most of the Roman, Byzantine, and Persian empires. In the within a period of about another 50 years, they have an agreement that gets written to describe the rights and obligations of the Christians and Jews. And it is written through the lens of a Christian. Okay, this is a Christian writing what the responsibilities are in the late 7th century. We call it the Pact of Umar. All right, and let's see. Gloria, would you start? And this is reading number 7. And as we go, Ray, if you would pick up along the way as well. I'll stop, and Ray, if you will pick up halfway through. Okay, Gloria. You need to unmute, though. You need to unmute. We can't hear you. There you go.
I need to find it again. I kind of lost.
Reading number 7.
Yeah. Okay.
If not, we'll go.
7.
Yeah.
Okay. We're up to 7. I think.
We shall keep our gates.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. We shall keep our gates wide open for passers-by and travelers. We shall provide 3 days' food and lodging to any Muslims who pass our way. We shall not shelter any spy in our churches or in our homes, nor shall we hide them from the Muslims. Such promises were important at a time when the Muslims were still establishing control over an area. Other promises are believed to have been added at a later time, including the following: we shall not build in our cities or in their neighborhood any new monasteries, churches, hermitages, or monk cells. We shall not restore by night or by day any of them that have fallen into ruin or which are located in Muslim quarters. We shall not hold public religious ceremonies. We shall not seek to proselytize anyone. We shall not prevent any of our kin from embracing Islam if they so desire. We shall show
Good. Ray,
deference.
would you continue?
We shall show deference to the Muslims and shall rise from their seats when they wish to sit down. We shall not seek to resemble the Muslims in any way with regard to their dress, as, for example, with the turban, sandals, or the parting of the hair in the Arab fashion. We shall not speak as they do, nor shall we adapt their surnames. We shall not ride on saddles. We shall not wear swords or bear weapons of any kind, or ever carry them with us. We shall not display our crosses or our books anywhere in the Muslims' thoroughfares or in their marketplaces. We shall only beat our clappers in our churches very quietly. We shall not raise our voices when reciting the service in our churches, nor when in the presence of Muslims. Neither shall we raise our voices in their funeral processions. We shall not come near the Muslims with our funeral processions. We shall not take any of the slaves that have been allowed to the Muslims. We shall not build our homes higher than theirs.
Okay. So there are also additional clauses that lay out for the people that there is a dhimmi tax. In other words, everybody pays taxes to the society, but Jews and Christians pay an additional tax, sort of a Jew tax, which shows up later in Europe as well. Okay, so there's additional economic responsibilities here to play out. This pact views non-Muslims, Christians and Jews, as people who have been given the opportunity to accept the truth, but who have willfully chosen to persist in their erroneous beliefs. Okay? Will tolerate you even though you don't seem to get it. In accordance with that, the government finds ways to distinguish Muslims from the non-believers, but also to humiliate them and remind them constantly of their inferiority. So, for example, the dhimmis are expected to wear different clothing. In 807 of the Common Era, the Caliph legislates that the Jews must wear a yellow belt and a tall canonical cap. So sort of a dunce cap and a yellow belt. All right, now the yellow belt has to echo for you. I mean, the fact is that Hitler did not necessarily have to come up with all his own ideas. Unfortunately, he was able to borrow from the history books and utilize this in terms of the yellow star during the Holocaust. There are other, over the centuries, there are other forms of humiliation that happen. By the 11th century, by the 1000s, each Jew had to wear a stamp of lead, a hanging lead from his neck on which the word dhimmi appeared. And women, and this is, I understand, a fashion faux pas, all right? Women had to wear shoes, one red and one black. Okay, clearly a fashion faux pas. All right, even from he who knows nothing about fashion. Okay. Women also had to wear around her neck or on her shoe a small brass bell, so that you could know they were approaching. Clothing is being used as a way of distinguishing who fits, who is in the upper group, and who is in the lower group. Other issues that came out of play. When a Jewish father of young children died, there was often a race between Jewish communal leaders who sought to place that Jewish child with Jewish parents and the Muslim authorities who wanted to convert the child to Islam and place them with Muslim parents. And most often, the Jews lost that race. And so Jews disappeared, often were just disappeared with the death of a father. The difficulties that are created by this are evidenced by the fact that over the next 150 years, many, many Christians convert to Islam in this world. It's economically disadvantaged. It is public humiliation. It is the loss of status. It is a prohibition in many ways of life in general. And so you see in Arabia, communities that were predominantly Christian becoming Muslims. I can't tell you that Jews didn't convert, but in sheer numbers and percentage-wise, not even close. It is a different experience. Many found, as a matter of fact, given their experience with the Christian communities under Roman rule, many of them found the protections, in a sense, as dhimmis. It was a safer world for them. And most historians will tell you that Jews have fared much better under Muslim rule than we have under Christian rule throughout most of history. We may not have liked, it may not have been a positive experience as I've described for you, but they weren't at risk of death and they had additional rights. There was some level of protection. Okay. All right. And again, I want to make that distinction. I'm trying to convey a message here. There's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I'm trying to convey the message that it was safer than Christianity and that they weren't necessarily in the same fears. But it wasn't a situation of equality, and it wasn't a situation of safety. The reason I say that is they also lived with the fears in Muslim society of a new midrash, of a new interpretation of Muslim sources that could lead to greater oppression. This happened in the 12th and 13th centuries, as an example. A group of fundamentalist Muslims overran much of the Muslim world. Okay, we know this happened in Spain as well, all the way out to Spain, who are as much against the non-fundamentalist Muslims as they are Christians and Jews. Think Al-Qaeda. Just because they don't hate Jews doesn't mean they don't hate modern Muslims as well. All right, they're as much the enemy as Jews are. In this period of time, in the 12th century, in Cordoba, a tradition arose that Muhammad's original decree of toleration was to be limited to a period of 500 years from his flight from Mecca. Since he leaves Mecca in the early 7th century, in the early 12th century, if the Jewish Messiah has not arrived, the Jews are now to give up their religion and join the ranks of the Muslims. This is a new midrash. This is a new interpretation. It's a new way of looking at it. And the Jews are fearing these kinds of arrivals. And on the basis of this new doctrine, the builder of this new Alhamidi empire in North Africa and Spain gives the Jews the choice of conversion or death. In 1133, when nearly all of the Jews of Fez refused to convert, more than 6,000 Jews are murdered. 4,000 more are murdered in Granada. This is as serious an attack on Jews as was the First Crusade. There were no more than 10,000 Jews killed in the Crusade either. The numbers match, and yet somehow it has not received much scholarly attention. But it was in the view of the Jews of the time. And we look at reading number 8. I'm going to ask Rhoda if you would. We're going to conclude with reading number 8, and then I'll take questions. And reading number 8 is the words of Maimonides.
It is on account of many sins that God has hurled us amidst the nation of hostile Ishmael. Never has a nation risen more injurious to us than this people, nor one which has come to degrade us and decimate us and make hating us their chief intent.
Okay. So while historians have said, the general perception, that's why I said most, I didn't say all historians, most historians have said we lived a better life under the Muslims than we did among the Jews. Maimonides is portraying a very different image. It doesn't get worse, so things must have been pretty awful. So with that in mind, I'm going to open up the floor to comments and questions, and let's see where we can go with this.
When did Maimonides leave Cordoba to go to Egypt, and was Egypt at that time under Islam control?
I don't believe Egypt was. I believe Egypt sort of had its own, has had its own rulership for a lot of years. And so I can't answer the question directly. I'm basing my knowledge on, I'm basing my response on the general trend of Egyptian history. Mm-hmm. And this is the time. His family is threatened. They go running, like many Jews, they run.
There in Cordoba, there is a statue of Maimonides.
Yeah. I worked for a JCC as an assistant director of the JCC in Dallas for a number of years. And during that time, I led a trip to Jewish Spain for seniors. And there's a lot of historical sites to be seen. But I was fascinated by the fact that our tour guide continually took us to one site after another, many of them churches, where he would say, this used to be a synagogue, but wasn't it nice of the Jews to give us their synagogue? So there are historical remnants that exist, but we might have a different interpretation of the historical importance. But yes, Maimonides, Yeah, we find, by the way, in Jewish history, in history in general, when somebody, a Jew, has particular scholarship and finds his way into the larger society, and we're talking about the brightest of the bright. You find the same thing with Moses, Maimonides, Mendelssohn, Moses Mendelssohn. All right, saying the same. He also finds his way into the larger society and is more well accepted because he seems to be one of those people that, you know, when you have an Einstein among you, they get special treatment.
Cantor,
Yes.
didn't no, Maimonides went from Cordoba to Fez,
And Portnoy.
and
Yeah.
and in Fez,
Looking.
I lost you.
yeah, in Fez, I thought there was some thought that Maimonides might have converted to Islam to save himself, and later on in one of his writings, he says, if you're faced with the choice of converting to Islam or being killed, convert to Islam, but in your heart maintain your Judaism.
Yeah, and because of that writing, that's where I can't tell you he didn't, but that is my understanding is he didn't, and that's just one of the many traditions that exists among many. All right. So I can't answer that, but yes, that is he does, and it is based on his writings and Rashi as well, who's living in the same time in France, basically 50 years earlier in France. Who, when the Jews are confronted with this in Spain, they use those writings to justify conversion if necessary. Yeah. And we're going to get to that in the next few weeks. Yes, Gail.
Yeah, so is it true that Islam adopted certain aspects of Christianity and Judaism to make it easier for Christians and Jews to adopt Islam?
Where I can't speak to specifics, I have to be the. I don't know who else is talking, but if you're going to talk, I'd ask you to mute. It has to be the case. You know that what Christianity did in its early stages was adopt many of the ways of the local pagans. All right. The whole concept of saints that developed from within Christianity was an adoption of paganistic ways so as to be a lure to people to buy into Christian ways. And I can't imagine that Islam, as it's developing in its early years, wouldn't have done the same thing because it makes sense. It's a very pragmatic behavior.
Right.
Yeah, Nomi.
I'm just wondering, and there probably really isn't an answer for this, but what is it in the Jewish thought and tradition and beliefs that sustains them throughout all these terrors? Is it the fact that they didn't convert to Islam is because their situation there wasn't as bad as when it was under the Christians, and that's what kept them going? But how come other people converted and they did much less so? What keeps them going?
All right. Look, you're right. There's no one answer. I'm going to give you a answer, again, among many. And when you have many, it means none of them are fully accurate. Okay? From the time of the temple on, if you look at what the rabbis did with Jewish suffering, is they understood it as punishment for not being Jewish enough. So one of the ways and one of the reasons that Jews have survived is that they understood punishment, suffering as punishment. Okay, that it's God's way of saying grasp harder onto all that is Jewish. All right, now, by the way, we're all shaking our heads yes and going yes, yes, yes. That theology went out the window with the Holocaust. There are very few, even amongst the Orthodox in today's world, who would say that's a theology I'm going to accept. But that was a Jewish theology of the rabbis in reference to the time of the temple and for many for subsequent disasters. And so that's a factor that enabled them to interpret what was happening to them through a Jewish lens. Okay. Anyone else? Joyce?
Could you go back over when you were talking about the reasons why the Jews were rejected in the Quran? Could you go back over the one about that Mohammed asserted Jews, like Christians, are not monotheists?
Yes.
That
So yeah, go ahead. And he
yeah,
bases it
I got
on-
confused about that Abraham's had another son, Ezra. And
No. It's not Abraham's son. The prophet Ezra, the last of the prophets.
Okay.
All right. What his claim is that somehow Judaism saw Ezra as a god, much like Christianity saw Jesus as the Son of God. That's how he makes that claim about Jews. And what I was saying, I've never heard that. In all the years of my seminary background, in all the years of my Ramah experience, in all the years of the classes I've taken, I've never even heard a hint at that concept. Okay. All right. I thank you all. Let me just look at the calendar. I think, so we are meeting next week, I believe. Today's what? Today is the
15th.
Yeah, so we meet next week on the 22nd. Oh, let me see if I have the calendar here. I'll tell you what, we'll send out a note, but I know there's a couple of weeks off. There's certainly the week of Thanksgiving. There's some breaks. Watch the calendar, and I think I sent it to everyone too. If you need a calendar of the classes, email me and I'll get it to you. In addition, there's some weeks off where either it's a holiday or I have a religious school responsibility, like last week where I wasn't able to teach. Sometimes I'm trying to blend all the different needs of the community with my role as the principal as well. All right. So everyone have a wonderful, yes.
Yeah, my calendar shows we're off on Sunday the 29th. We're back on Sunday the 6th. We're off on Sunday the 13th, back on Sunday the 20th, and then off for, I think, a couple of weeks.
Yeah. And the 13th is a school Hanukkah program.
I have a different calendar.
What do you have?
I have that we're on November 22nd.
Yes. Yeah, we are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. We are. So apparently we're on next week. Next week, we're going into the Crusades. That's our next journey.
Do we have to dress up?
I would love it.
You can dress up, Sandy. We look forward to it.
Yes, indeed. I will be sending Leslie a note. And
Dressing up means wearing long pants.
All
And we
right,
were hoping
everyone.
for Sir Lancelot.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Have a good week, everyone.
You too.
Yes.